Good afternoon, everybody. It's 12:30, and it's time for SFU City Conversations. So I want to welcome you. I'm Michael Alexander, the director of SFU City Conversations. SFU City Conversations is presented by SFU Public Square, and we want to thank our sponsors, SFU Vancouver, the Center for Dialogue, and the SFU City Program. We would like to acknowledge that this event, as all of our events, is taking place on unceded traditional Coast Salish territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And who's here for the first time? Raise your hands. Lovely. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. This is a pretty formal looking lecture room, but we don't have speakers at City Conversations, and we don't even have an audience. Instead, we have presenters, and you are the participants. And that's the key to what we do. You participate, and if you do participate, you'll get the most out of this hour. Most of the time is for your questions, your opinions, your observations. The whole point is to encourage a conversation. It's not rude to eat your lunch at City Conversations, so if you brought it, it is lunchtime. If you brought your lunch, thank you. If you're tweeting, the hashtag is CityConv, CityConv. And if you are new and you would like to be on our email list to learn what our future events are all about, please put your name and your email on the, where is it? We'll pass a sheet around. Thank you. So today, yes, is not on. Yeah, this is for the feed that we do online. Our topic today is, are we becoming less generous? Philanthropy is critically important. It's a part of Canadian life, a key supporter of education, health, and the arts. As an example, last month, the Chan family donated $40 million to help fund a new Vancouver art gallery. Philanthropy is a mainstay of organized religion and provides crucial support for marginalized people facing socioeconomic barriers. We Canadians pride ourselves on giving back. It's part of our identity. But as you'll hear, a recent report finds that the current model of philanthropy in Canada is unsustainable. Why is it that philanthropic donations by individuals and families have been in decline since 2006? Does rising income inequality and wealth concentration among older Canadians mean that younger generations have less to give? How can we ensure that charitable organizations remain properly funded and continue to provide vital support? To start the conversation, we want to welcome Calvin Fong, who is the Vancouver Foundation's Director of Donor Services. Jeanette Ageson, I'm going to blow it. Ageson, thank you, is publisher of the online newspaper, the Tyee, and David Love, I can't blow that name, is president of the Vancouver chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and of course you had to capitalize on your name, Principal of LOVEfundraising. So, Calvin, I believe you're going to go first.
Yes, so I get the pleasure of kicking off and to speak about that first slide. Yes, so in the invitation, it was reported that charitable giving by Canadians have decreased since 2006. and the slide is a representation of one of the pages in the Canada Helps 2018 Giving Report. So I take the stance that charitable giving is not declining in Canada, but I think it needs to also be put in perspective as what we're measuring and how we measure that, and specifically in regards to the starting point of 2006. I think it has to be said that in 2006, there were, how can we put it, questionable taxation schemes that were put out by many organizations that since 2006, the Canada Revenue Agency has denied for those taxpayers who claim those donations tax receipts to the amount of about $1.3 billion. So if we take a look at 2006 as a starting point and say that generosity was peaking there and has decreased since 2006, we have to take in the fact that many of those donations that were claimed and reported in 2006 have now been denied. And as a consequence, perhaps the full giving in that year is overreported. At the same time, if you look at the tax returns of charities that reported in 2006, there was about $15.4 billion of donations that were tax receipted that were not reported by Canadian taxpayers and used on the tax returns, representing that $9.4 billion in 2006. So there's approximately $6 billion that weren't reported by Canadian taxpayers in 2006 that were actually received by charities at that time. We also have to look at the fact that we're only looking at dollars reported by charities in their tax returns, and for those donations claimed by taxpayers in their tax returns. Those are just dollar amounts. I would consider that generosity encompasses not only financial support of charities, but also the volunteerism that happens, and also from the standpoint of other activities that encompass sports associations, not-for-profit societies that receive financial support but don't issue a donation tax receipt for. So I would hazard to say that as 2006 is a starting point, you have to factor in that there must be an interpretation of what those dollars are. Moving forward in terms of looking at what is currently the charitable giving scene in Canada, just to give a sense, in 2016, Canadians reported about $9.4 billion in donation tax receipts given. In 2017, that amounted to 5.3 million taxpayers in Canada, representing about $9.5 billion in donation tax receipts reported. In BC, the median dollar donation of citizens in BC was $460. The lowest was Quebec, as a province, $130. The highest median dollar donation was actually given by citizens in Nunavut at $560 in 2017. If we look at major geographical locations, cities in Canada, Vancouver's median dollar donation was $480. The lowest was Saguenay and Trois-Rivières in Quebec at $100 per Quebec citizen. The highest median dollar donation by a citizen of a metropolitan area was Abbotsford Mission. They gave, on average, median dollar amount, $840 per person. So I think just to look at the generosity of Canadians overall, just to give some statistics about what that looks like. I also have to think that generosity, again, is not measured on just donation tax receipts issued. If we look at last year, the unfortunate tragedy of the Humboldt Broncos, the hockey team that sadly many of the players are injured and killed. There was an outpouring of generosity by Canadians after that effect through a GoFundMe page. At the conclusion of late April 2018, $15.1 million was raised through the GoFundMe page. Those are not tax receipted. Those are not reported in any statistics here. But if there is a demonstration of generosity of Canadians, I think that is a fine example of that. Again, you need to understand what statistics are we measuring in order to measure what the generosity of Canadians are. So the argument I have, again, is I think Canadians are very generous. But I think you have to encompass what is the metric you're using to define what generosity is. One last thing I just wanted to put in front of everybody is There's an organization called Charities Aid Foundation, based out of the UK, with many offices around the world. They publish an annual World Giving Index, which scores countries on their participation and behaviors in giving. In 2017, the first ranked country in the World Index of Giving was Indonesia. The US was ranked 4th. Canada is ranked 15th. I believe the number of countries involved were 60. I think that's a pretty good showing. I'll pass it on now to my colleague, Jeanette, and she'll carry on with the discussion.
Thank you.
All right, so I was asked to join this conversation last week, and so I've been turning this question around in my mind for a bit. Are we becoming less generous? And I'm not a journalist or an editor, but I can tell that I've been working with them for quite a while, because I immediately wanted to get out my red pen and just tear this question apart. First of all, who is we? I don't know how to answer that. I don't compile reports and track statistics on charitable giving, so I don't know if I can really speak to that. But if I can break down the question more in terms of our Tyee readers becoming less generous towards the Tyee, that is something that I can talk about. And the answer to this question is no, which is fantastic. However, I would add so many asterisks to that statement, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So the Tyee has been asking for reader help to contribute directly to our editorial budget. We've been experimenting with that for about 10 years, and we've been putting a lot more effort into that in just the last few years. And it's been going very well for us. Since 2014, if things go as they should for this year, we will have tripled the amount of money going into our editorial budget from our readers, and that's just by asking them. So we don't have a paywall. We don't have anything where people have to pay to read our content. It's just we ask people to help us make this thing and keep it open and accessible for everyone. And so when we started doing that, it was seen as a very strange thing for a news organization to ask its readers to pitch in, not through a subscription or paywall or getting something in the mail, but just in the spirit of giving or in the spirit of making this possible, please put some money in the hat so that we can continue to do our work. And some really fantastic things have started happening. So our readers are very passionate about the Tyee, and some of them have even started self-organizing to raise money for reporting projects. So this happened in the last year. There's a very dedicated group of commenters that comment on basically every Tyee story. If you go onto any of our stories, you'll notice, if you are really paying attention, you'll notice some of the same names, and they gather and they duke it out and they agree and then they fight and they make up. And they really just like hang out and they discuss things in our comment section, which is wonderful and also challenging to moderate sometimes. But so anyways, this is a really amazing story. So one of the commenters, Merv 80, passed away, and his other commenter friends, they got together and, unbeknownst to us, raised $3,000 of their own money. And then they contacted us and said, we want to give this to you to offer a fellowship to an emerging journalist to report on something that Merv is really passionate about. So we created a fellowship for Andrew Seal to report on electoral reform, and he published a fantastic 5-part series really breaking down all the nuances with the electoral reform referendum in the fall. So these things are wonderful. And then here comes the asterisks. So while the giving for us has been quite good, and it's allowed us to have some stability and to have some moderate growth, it's against this backdrop of what's happening in the news industry across the country. So this is an image from a 2016 report, I believe, called The Shattered Mirror, put together by the Public Policy Forum. So it's showing closures or mergers of news outlets since 2008. And the number is 169. And that doesn't capture the jobs cut within existing news outlets. So it's a huge loss of journalism capacity across the country. And so the reasons for this collapse are multiple, and it's a more complex thing that I can get into in the space of this conversation. But part of the reason is the business model for how news used to get paid for has completely been disrupted. So advertising used to support a lot of news production, and other platforms have come along and have been able to offer a more targeted, cheaper, better way to advertise. And so that has really scooped up a lot of the money that used to go to paying reporters. And there has been some innovation in the field. So we've been trying stuff out. So there's other outlets that are trying out different ways to pay for journalism, but it hasn't been enough to offset all the losses that have happened. So yeah, we have been experimenting. There are other experiments, but we've been doing this a little bit on the margins of what regular charitable giving in Canada is. So up until recently, and the change hasn't come through yet, but journalism in and of itself has not been eligible for charitable status. So Tyee readers give us money and they don't actually get a tax receipt, which makes it all the more amazing that they give us money. And because we are not a qualified donee and we're not charitable, it also cuts off a lot of other really potential interesting funding sources. So if I look south to the States, they have a very vibrant, multifaceted nonprofit news ecosystem, and they are able to give tax receipts. And there's whole foundations that are set up just to support journalism. And so there's this amazing thing called the News Match in the States, where foundations like the Knight Foundation, they put up a bunch of money and they challenge readers to, in a given set time, to give money to their nonprofit news outlets, and the foundation will match it. And so it's allowing some reader choice. It's allowing people to, say what they value. And then a huge amount of support also comes from the foundations. So this is just one thing that could be unlocked if news organizations were given charitable status or qualified donee status. And there's so much left to do.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Much like my colleague to the left, Jeanette, I want to tear apart the question too. And much like Calvin, he and I met earlier this week and we said, we don't agree. We actually are in the sector. We see what's happening each and every day, not only in our own communities, but we're in touch with people nationally and internationally. And I would in fact say that we are becoming more generous, but yet the measurement tools that we're using to count that metric haven't quite been established yet. You've heard about the advances being made by the Tyee. That's your 10 years doing that, I think. Making requests. That's a new call out. That's new contributions to community that is based on social purpose and an attainment of a mission-driven goal that meets and fulfills a need for that individual that's contributing. I, for one, contributed to a mayoral candidate here in Vancouver, and I did not get a tax receipt for that. So that's not measured anywhere. So I think that some of the measurement tools we're using are a bit flawed, and we haven't quite caught up yet. I'm aware that I'm speaking at a university and there could be some data wonks in the room. So, and understanding that, we all know that numbers tell a story, and that the numbers in the giving report did look a little bit bleak when I was looking at some of them. I was going, does that kind of match up with some numbers I'm seeing? So as you see in my title, I have the privilege of being the president for the local chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. I represent almost 400 fundraising professionals in this city. A few are in this room right now. I'm very pleased to see that. And fundraising is certainly tough work, and I'm not going to deny that. But what we're seeing each and every day is pieces of generosity from people that want to take part in our communities. In the description for today's event, we saw the announcement for the Chan family's latest gift. And I say latest gift because if you've been to, there's another smaller university somewhere in this city out on Point Grey, and they have a facility called the Chan Center. That was a $10 million donation. And the most recent contribution to the Vancouver Art Gallery was $40 million. So, to look at the premise, are we becoming less generous? I'd say on that one, no. Why did they give? We'd have to go out with the family and have a beer or some sort of conversation with them to actually find out what their motivation was. But what I can tell you is that the son, Caleb's son, is on the board of the Vancouver Art Gallery. So he was deeply embedded within the reasons why they needed a new gallery. The Association of Fundraising Professionals Canada constantly is posing questions to benefit their members in a greater understanding of the topic, what Canadian donors want. And so we partnered with Ipsos to do a study in 2018 and release some stats. And I'll just rifle off a few of them that kind of match up to what Calvin was saying, but I think dig a little deeper into who is making the gifts and the bigger question that more sophisticated fundraising shops use, it's the why. So in 7 in 10 Canadians have reported making a financial donation, which is up 4 points from 2015. So that's just in 2.5 years. So that's a pretty darn good increase. And it's come primarily from older millennials. And I think I probably see some older millennials in the room. I can't put my hand up, but I bet I see some. Michael says yes. And that's the age 25 to 34. And those individuals. I just thought you were aspirational, Michael. I like that.
Well, I could be.
They appear to be back in a position to make a donation, so their income has gone up, and they're contributing more towards local causes. So, and some of those contributions that, again, are not measured could be to a local cause of a newspaper that they care deeply about, or to their community foundation, the Vancouver Foundation. I think it's interesting to note that donors are now spreading their donations among more causes. So they're not quite so loyal to 1 or 2 causes. So they're moving to 2 or 3 causes mostly. And when I work with my clients, I always say you want to be in that top 2 or 3 as a contribution. So you don't want to lose a donor, because once you've lost a donor, it's really hard to get them back. Because I'm sure I could do a survey. I'll do a survey right now in the room. How many of you have 2 or 3 charities that you contribute to, and it would take a lot to make you stop donating to that charity? Can I see a show of hands? For those that are watching online and not having the privilege of seeing this good-looking group, I was about 80%. I'd say 80% at least of this room. So there's great donor loyalty in the sector. People are really attached to the causes that they care deeply about. Interesting to note as well, here in British Columbia, we had the largest increase for charitable donations between 2015 and 2017 and a half. It was up almost 20%, 18.9%. So we're not in Nunavut being the most generous at all. Has anyone been to Nunavut? Can we talk about that after as to very generous? That would be fascinating. Interesting to note that unfortunately for SFU, they have education has experienced a decline in contributions. What we're seeing a greater increase of people making contributions to is, surprise, health, right? And why might that be? It's because boomers like me and people that are getting to that age where health matters more, and either to them or to someone they care deeply about, they are contributing to that cause. So I think that speaks to the local need as well, because you contribute to your local hospital or local charity. Just look at the Jimmy Pattison gift recently to St. Paul's Hospital, right? Because he had an affinity to that facility. So to look at that basic premise question then of, are we becoming less generous? I think that I look forward to the data wonks in the room and those that can better measure how we're being generous, to be able to come up with a more fulsome report as to what is making Canadians feel the drive to make a contribution. There's so many stats and figures. If you're interested in digging for them, they're available online. It's the Association of Fundraising Professionals. It's the What Canadian Donors Want survey, publicly released through Ipsos. And so it looks a lot deeper at gender-based giving. How more women now are making contribution decisions as they weren't before. And more focus on what they contribute towards. I think in Canada, we are experiencing a greater divide in who's able to make a contribution. So we're having many people with greater gifts that are able to contribute. And I just got the sign. If you can't see it, I wish I could hold it up. It's saying time's up. So it wasn't a hashtag time's up, but it was just time's up. So again, you can tell that I'm passionate about the topic, and I look forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of our presenters. And yes, I'm a boomer. I'm at the top end of the boomers. Not a millennial. So let's start the conversation. Who would like to go first? I see a hand. Yes, Leslie. And let's get a microphone to you, because otherwise the people who are listening online or watching online won't be able to hear you.
I think it's incredibly important to deal with philanthropy from both the sort of small donations up, but you also need leaders like the Chan family in the community. And having had the experience of trying to raise money to build a new building at UBC for our School of Architecture, Landscape Architecture, I can say that there is an incredible dearth of people in this community, the wealthiest people in this community, willing to make large donations. I was thrilled to see the art gallery's donation, but there should be a lot more of that scale, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million kind of gifts in a community as wealthy as this. And when you talk about city building and projects, capital projects like the art gallery, for example, that need major gifts, these people just have to come out of the woodwork. And they're just, it's just shocking that, for example, the developers or people involved with the construction industry that are making so much money are so tight-fisted, with a few exceptions. And it's I don't know how to just say it bluntly, how to shame people into giving back to the community. But very quickly, I want to be very quick, but I moved here from Minneapolis, and there they have a 1% club. It's been going on for over 100 years, where the wealthiest people in the community get together, commit to giving 1% of something back collectively. So they join forces. So you were talking about dispersing giving. They join forces. The art gallery needs a new building. Let's do it for the next few years. And they've been able to build new libraries, new Guthrie Theater, et cetera, et cetera. Incredible. But what they're finding now is that the next generation in their families, the millennials, don't like to be part of collective giving. They have a school in Africa they want to build, or they have something else they want to do. So that collective power of giving is even being diminished in a city that's known for philanthropy like Minneapolis.
Thank you. Got a hand up in the back row. Here we go. Thank you.
My name is Mo, and I like to ask, there used to be several years ago in one of the newspapers that I read during Christmas time, articles would appear that show that the studies of the CRA, that the lower income people, relative to their income, they are more generous than the richer people. Also, I think, I'm not a psychologist, but there are, might be some psychologists, their studies also show that generally the richer people are meaner people in many ways. Now, has CRA published any recent study about how the lower income people better contribute with respect to their income than the richer people?
Calvin.
I don't know of any CRA study to that point, Mo, in regards to the percentage of a lower income family's total income donated towards charities. But I do know that there have been other studies that do reflect that the generosity as a percentage of income tends to be greater with lower income individuals than higher income as a percentage of total income. I'm not too sure what the motivation of that, other than the generosity of wanting to give and imparting that of the DNA of the individual. But not that I know of a study of CRA for that.
Yes.
If I can just pull back to Leslie's point about shaming people. I know you were saying it somewhat in jest, but I think it speaks to the culture of no. I don't think a charitable contribution can be garnered out of shame. I don't believe that's a motivator. People are motivated to give because they want to contribute to the community. Because they were asked. I can't tell you the number of people that I've been in for very significant meetings where good meaning volunteers and staff people have been approaching them to make a gift, and they have been afraid to ask for money. And so I think a difference between Canadians and Americans that I've noted in my professional practice is Americans ain't shy, and they don't have the expectation that the government is going to contribute first. So having had clients in the States, they're like, let's get her done, because we know that the government isn't going to help us. So I think that's a difference between our more left socialist leaning side and where we stand ourselves. And then Mo, to your point, just in regards to wealth indicators of contributions. I think people are motivated because they want to help those in their community. And have you been to the East Coast and even to the coast here, little fishing villages? They have to take care of one another. If they don't care for one another, they're hooped. And so I think as we're getting more disparate in our wealth and in families and in wealth, I think we're losing touch of that sense of community as a whole. So I would argue that we need to create forums like this and create dialogues through as many forums as you can. Religious institutions are a lovely way to do that because you bring people together for meaningful dialogue. The United Way is a lovely way to do that. There are universities, there are community groups. It's to talk about what difference being philanthropic and giving can make. I think we're losing that in our dialogue as not only a community, but as families.
Okay. Over here, and then lady over here. Oh, sorry. Then go ahead.
Perhaps this question is more directed towards Calvin and David in the general philanthropic sector. I'm wondering, obviously this doesn't apply to all fundraising. I don't think it does, at least. And feel free to unpack the question as you will. But some critics will argue that fundraising for socially necessary purposes lessens the pressure on the public sector, on governments, from filling in voids that would otherwise be their responsibility, looking at the downtown east side or whatnot. So as in addition to which the money that goes through those does not go through a board governed entity where people of privilege obviously sit on boards, more transparent financial access, I guess, through government, that is. I'm wondering to what extent then the fundraising sector affects or has to kind of juggle with this reality that perhaps they're lessening the need for people to work through the served and delegitimizing democracy in a sense.
Thanks. Interesting question about the connection and reliance almost that we as Canadians have on government to make the first gift. To use an illustration, I had the privilege of being the campaign director for a drug treatment facility for youth up in the Okanagan. It's BC's first residential facility. It's called The Crossing at Karamias. And I couldn't get people to donate until the government was in. No one would make a gift. As soon as the government was in, $6 million, six and change project, government came in about 6 months into our campaign, halfway through, with 2 out of the 6, and then the money started to come. And so we are almost pre-programmed for that contribution to come from government first. But I would also argue that some of the best fundraisers I know are excellent at government relations and teasing money out of the government in very creative ways. So not just from the expected ministry, but from other avenues. So municipal, from city, from provincial, from federal governments that wouldn't necessarily be affected. So I would say that people that are in professional capacities, and Jeanette may one day join, she might be having so much fun today, she might want to leave the Tyee and become a fundraiser. From our experience, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, that some of the best fundraisers are excellent at government relations. So I think we have to find that hand-in-hand partnership. And having worked at St. Paul's, conversations I would have would speak to, often what we're doing is putting the cherry on the top. The government does the basics, but to get some of the extras, to get an extra machine, to do more and more, is coming from community, is coming through philanthropy.
Okay, there's here and then this one.
Thank you
There
very
we go.
much. Two things. One is, I thought you were going to ask the question. When I contribute to the Tyee, yes, the email comes from something else. What is that other entity? Or don't you know about it?
This sounds like a customer service question that we could take offline. I'm not sure about that. It should come from the Tyee. Like the response email that when you get back?
The reminder. Yeah.
Oh, a reminder. That's our payment processor. We'll take this offline afterwards.
But this leads to my second question, and that is that in the media, there's been lots of stories about how much fundraisers actually take as their commission for fundraising for a very worthy cause. And I'm afraid it stops me in my tracks when I see something come through and asking and begging and pointing out the wonderful services that are going to be provided. And I want to go back and go directly to whoever that group is, if it's Greenpeace, if it's many of the places that I support. And I was going to ask your opinion of both of you, because you're the professional fundraiser. Has there been misinformation? Is it false news, as somebody might describe it? Is there a reasonable amount that you fundraise for a group and you take as a commission your 10% or 15%, but not 50%?
Yeah. I think fundraising is done in this country in a multifaceted way. So lots of people use different strategies. Some people have in-house staff who do their fundraising, and that's what we do. I do all of our fundraising. I get paid the same amount whether I bring in hundreds of thousands or don't hit my target. And then, yeah, there are firms that you can hire to help you fundraise, and that can be great for organizations that they don't have the in-house capacity to fundraise. So a lot of that money would not exist in their budget at all if they hadn't called in those professionals. But I'm not a reporter. I haven't reported on any of those activities. So I don't know if I can speak to that so much, but there is a very, very different strategies all across the board for how people do fundraising.
Thanks for the question, because it gives us an opportunity to address it, full stop, period. Anyone that is a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals will not receive a commission. It's full salary, that's it. It breaches our code of ethics. And I'll tell you why. If I was to get a commission for getting a gift from you, I would be motivated by self. And boy, David needs a new pair of shoes. And so I'm going to do everything I can to get your gift, to get that commission. That's not how we work. We're mission driven. We are there for the organization. Granted, fundraisers are within organizations and are part of the administration. So you'll often see, if you go to Canada Revenue Agency, and I encourage you to do that before you make a contribution, go to CRA Charities, type in the name of the charity that you're looking for, and look at the numbers. It'll show you what people are making. It'll show you a variety of numbers. Again, they can be interpreted because there's different types of reporting. But my key message back to you is do some homework first. Just ask the question of the charity before before you contribute to it first. But I will tell you that the vast majority of organizations that I'm affiliated with, in fact, all that I'm affiliated with, I won't affiliate with anyone that works on a commission structure. Do it for flat fee.
Is there something we should look for? Is there religious Association of Charity Registered Fundraisers?
Organizations can prescribe to Imagine, which is a charitable watchdog. So many use them. Imagine Canada, it's based out of Ottawa, and so if you prescribe to Imagine, you're guaranteed that they are not. I'm looking at. We're joined today by the executive director of the United Way of the Lower Mainland, Michael McKnight. So, Michael, is that correct?
Yeah, Imagine is the only nationally recognized certification.
Yeah. Thank you.
His answer was Imagine is the only certified organization.
I would just like to also add that, echoing David's comment, that any professional fundraiser will not receive or accept a commission for fundraising. They're, again, tied to the mission of their organization. They're there to support the organization, and they wouldn't be clouded in their activities by some sort of financial reward as a commission. That's not to say there are other agencies, other organizations out there that offer services for fundraising, which has a cost. And for those organizations that don't have in-house staff to do that, engaging an outside firm and paying for the cost of that service can raise funds for that organization, and many do. I also want to point out that in terms of charities, fundraising expenditures and costs of that are certainly an important part of any donor's due diligence to look at a charity. But who's to say that 60% of a dollar raised is worse than 35% of a dollar raised if the donation is going to a worthy cause and that you as a donor are aligned to that cause? As long as you know that those dollars are being spent in furtherance of that cause, and that the expenditures are paying for the light, the heat, the salary, the roof, the staff to accomplish that mission, is fundraising costs really that important as a determinant of whether you give or do not? Lastly, I want to point out that Greenpeace is not a charity. It's not a registered charity.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan, and somebody said something about small communities here, and thank you for that, because I grew up in a small community, and I'm very familiar with how we look after each other. And I think that part of the magic formula of certainly what I know for myself and many of my friends in terms of sustainable investing in charities. To quote Sam Dubach in Toronto, who spoke at an AFN presentation there, and he sort of tilted the concept of donor on its head and said, let's treat our donors as investors. And I thought that's kind of a magical word to use in the context of sustainability in philanthropy. So I'm just wondering, after saying that, if you can comment of any of your research about the success of investors doing both, contributing both time and financially, and if that seems to garner greater success in the philanthropic world.
I haven't done any large-scale research, but I definitely can tell from my own work that another part of the question that I had a problem with is it said, are we becoming less generous? And when we're asking people to support our work, we aren't trying to tap a spirit of generosity. It's more of an investment kind of mindset. It's like this, let's make something that we otherwise couldn't make. And we try to frame things as well to show specifically like one specific kind of project that people will be able to say that happened because I gave. If I didn't give, it wouldn't have happened. So it's not about we need this, please help us. It's about let's make something together.
Okay, gentleman over here, please.
My name's Stuart. A comment and a question. My comment is that I suspect when our household stops reading the Vancouver Sun, Tyee will get the money.
Let's talk
And it
later.
may not take very long. My question is about the presence of organizations that take some of the money in order to process the donation to wherever. And I'm thinking about Canada Helps and one I learned about yesterday called Chimp. So I'm interested to know what your views are.
There is a cost to processing donations, and for many organizations, staying up with IT, particularly the security of donor data, can be quite a handful. So to have that server and to have it encrypted and not have Russian bots or something steal that information. And so when organizations like Chimp and others started coming forward to offer that services to charities, for many that are very small, and the vast majority of charities in Canada are like 1, 2, 3 people, it was like a hallelujah, they're doing this. And of course, there's going to be a modest service fee for doing that. The same as there's a service fee to a retailer when you use your Visa card. So I think you just, like anything, you have to do your homework and just see what is that percentage.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Mary Ellen. I'd like to know if you think that the federal tax system encourages philanthropy, and what's the comparison with the U.S. in that regard?
Perfect.
In my opinion, I think Canada is one of the most generous tax systems to allow for donations. The way it provides tax exemption for gifts and public securities, the way it gives a very generous donation. If you give greater than $200, you almost offset half of that in terms of taxes that you pay to your income. How that compares to, say, the U.S. They equally have a tax system which allows for deduction, but there is now allowance for you to claim a unified tax credit based on making donations, so you don't have to submit itemizations for. The fear of that is that people will just basically claim the standard base, not claim the deductions, and not take the full benefit of that, but feel that being generous because they're claiming just the base. I question whether that's going to increase generosity or even perpetuate the continuation of donations at the American border. But from the studies that I've seen in terms of taxation and the generosity of that taxation in the country, Canada seems to be one that's highlighted as being very generous and very open to allow for those donations.
Calvin, would you restate that and put an emphasis on it? How does the tax, how does the government allow for your contributions on your tax form?
The Canadian tax system is essentially that for every dollar that you donate, you get half of it back as a tax credit. So it's not a tax deduction. In other words, you don't deduct it from your income. You deduct it as 50 cents off each tax dollar that you pay.
Uh-huh.
That working also?
This one's also not working.
Is that one working?
Yeah, that one's working.
So to repeat again, the Canadian tax system is that for every dollar that you donate, you generally receive a tax credit of 50 cents on the dollar. So if you donate $200, you get back $100 as a tax credit deducted against the taxes that you would owe. In some jurisdictions like the US, it's actually a tax deduction. You get it reduced off your income, which reduces your income, but taxes are still applied against that in terms of the rate. So I would think from the standpoint of Canada, it's a much more generous tax regime.
I can just add one additional point. In 2006, the federal government made a landmark decision to remove the capital gains tax from the contribution of publicly traded shares. And so if you have shares, let's say you have a safety deposit box and of your parents or your own, and it's gathering dust, if you still have one of those paper. I was with a fellow that had this, and he blew off the dust of it. And if he gives that right to the charity and he doesn't cash it in himself, zero capital gains. So if he bought that and it was worth 5 cents and worth $5 million, zero capital gains for him. It's the secret sauce in philanthropy right now. And there's not a lot of awareness about that. So for all of you that are in this room or watching throughout the world, in Canada, we're able to do this. Well, this is Facebook Live. It's everywhere.
You did get a double whammy. You also get the $5 million tax donation receipt for the value.
Yes, you get the receipt for the value as well. That's why tax advisors today are really earning their money to help you be very creative. But I do want to emphasize, as we're talking about being generous today, that studies consistently show in Canada that a tax receipt is not the primary driver for making a contribution. That is not it.
Very interesting. Gentlemen in the back, do we have a microphone for you?
Hi, my comments not necessarily directed to the speakers, but more so to the room, I think, just based off some things I've heard and an observation I want to share. We talked a lot about fees, administration, costs, as it's associated with charity and giving, but we also talked a lot about investments and using a lot of business language. And I'm finding that we want to treat charities like businesses, as if they're supposed to be doing this type of work, but we don't want to pay them for it, right? And I think this is an ongoing conversation and one that we should be aware of as donors or as folks who work within this industry, that I would love to get paid in a city like Vancouver and still bring in the dough, right? Like, as a millennial who wants to work in this field, I can't survive on 10% administrative fees. Let's be honest here, right? Like, I think we need to have an honest conversation about what it means to give $1, and that 35% of that dollar goes to paying my wage, paying that I can always consistently follow up with you and get your money to where it needs to go, right? And I think Chimp is a new way of doing it, but there are people who still do this type of work. And I think it's important to remember that there's a human behind this philanthropy work. And I speak especially from a young perspective, as a millennial living in Vancouver, that this is not an easy game to play for us. Don't make it harder for us.
Just to add to that, from a charity's perspective, I spoke to a donor once who wanted to make a substantial donation, but was concerned about making donations to charities that he appears to see a high cost in terms of making that to the charity. Their fundraising expenses are supposedly high. Their overhead is supposedly high. And he wanted to find a no-cost alternative to his giving. I suggested to him, if he wanted to have no cost of giving, there's a gentleman on the corner who has a tin cup. Yeah. Quickest, easiest, no-cost way to make a donation to help out a person in society. But if you want to do it in a structured, in a strategic, and a transparent way that's reported back to community, there's a charity that does that, but there's a cost to do that. So I just put that out as a way to reflect on what may be, as Vincent pointed out, treating charities as a method of doing social good at no cost, but we have no problems in investing in a company that would have a $10 million CEO and have losses and cut jobs, but we feel they're doing good jobs for society. So it's just the sort of conundrum that people have in terms of viewing charities as a company.
Just as a sidebar, I encourage you to read Dan Pallotta's book, because he talks about people in the charitable sector, and some people call it third sector or whatever it is, and that we're not overhead. So looking at overhead for an organization is not being mission driven and focused. So organizations may be starting up a brand new program. They might have purchased a building. There's a variety of reasons why you might see higher overhead. But I firmly believe that the charitable sector is worth investing in. So I do like business language for that, because there's some very smart people in this sector that are driven not by widget or by the acquisition of stuff, but by social purpose. So thank you for your work.
Okay. Over there.
I have a sort of maybe a question or observation, just sort of looking at the history of philanthropy. It's maybe historically it was a feudal system, and the king did this, and then the church came in and had its own form of philanthropy or whatever religious structure. But as we move forward and we have more sort of high tech and we have more, my concern is that the idea of stewardship and community investment and philanthropy for the greater good is sometimes overshadowed today about people who choose to give and they want to kind of create their own foundation, or they want to sort of personalize it to such a degree it almost becomes narcissistic, and it doesn't go back to, and I think speaking to the Chan gift, I mean, that was true stewardship and grace about being a part of the community. They really, I think, felt they wanted to make a profound difference to the community of Vancouver, and dialogue and public discourse and all that, and art was a vehicle for them to do that. But I don't think I think they're quite rare now. I think there are other people in this community who have been very successful, of a newer generation, that don't really believe in kind of linking arms for the community. It's more about themselves. I'm just wondering if you have any strategies about maybe the language or the way of educating the next generation that we're stronger as a community than we are by these little individual foundations. I mean, a foundation is fine, but when people just direct everything to their one, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying that I think there's been an evolution of how we give, and are we tapping into the next generation and the methodology in what makes it important to them? Because I don't know if community for the larger gifts is as big a deal as their own sort of purpose. And
A lot to unpack there.
sorry.
Anybody?
Yeah, I think giving is a social act, and I mean that in a variety of ways. So some people want to demonstrate to others that they are giving, and it's also someone being asked by someone that they know. So going up to someone cold without having any sort of connection, and using sort of shame tactics, or like, this is something that you should do. In my experience, that wouldn't be a very successful ask, but it is probably with that developing of networks and trusted relationships, and then someone making an ask, and that ask is coming from someone that they trust. So I think it's partially about developing trusting relationships between people.
I also think too, maybe it's also a reflection of the current day society, where people are celebrated for being a self-entrepreneur, or being that leader by themselves to move forward and take that action, and that we lack the connective tissue in community to link arms and come to a common purpose or a common need. Is that a fracturing of community? I'm not sure. Is there a unifying purpose or cause that bring people together? I think there still is, but I think it's more difficult now to bring people together because of our sort of fragmented society and how we interact with one another. Maybe that speaks to the idea that as a community in Vancouver, we're less connected to our neighbors, or less connected to the person next door, and perhaps that sort of isolation or lack of connective tissue prevents us from coming together for a unified part. Maybe that's something that we as a community need to work better on.
We have time for one more, so please go
Hi,
ahead.
my name is Anne, and I'm just following up on a couple of previous comments about giving in Vancouver. An observation that perhaps the IT or high-tech sector is not really following in the steps of previous corporate giving practices in our city, making a lot of money and not really giving back. Do you have any comments on that, or any strategies?
Interesting question. So just to make sure I understand it correctly, it's the techs that are so kind of new donors, like the new money compared to old money. Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, to give you an example, I work for SFU, and a colleague of mine was having a conversation about STEM education for girls that we were doing with one of the big companies that have recently opened a branch office here. And they were very interested in the project and very encouraging, until my colleague suggested perhaps they could consider a modest gift. And they said, well, perhaps you should ask the government.
So I think that's what'll, I hope to make this an uplifting last answer. And it reflects off of what Calvin said really about, I think it's our role in community to help shining a light on the goodness of philanthropy and the social return and the personal return. I don't know about you, but when I give a Christmas present, than when I get one. Is that true for you too? And so I think by exemplifying that more, I think oftentimes it can be simple ignorance of what that feeling is like. And both Calvin and I have had the privilege of working with donors who have made repeated gifts, and to work with them because they know what's going to happen. They know that feeling that they're going to get. They know the good it's going to do. And I think we need to ask people that are making the gifts to not be so shy about it and to talk about it in their friends, creating platforms like this one. For those on Facebook, it is a standing room only room. There's a lot of interest in this conversation. So I think creating more opportunities like this to actually have that dialogue, I think is going to help encourage this potential donor to the STEM program at SFU. So I wish your colleague good luck and keep up the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Well, I want to thank I hope you'll join me in thanking our presenters. Lots of very interesting information. Our next city conversation, oops, I clicked too far. They clicked too far. There we are. Thursday, March 21st, a month from today, conservationists and urbanists. What are we talking about? A new way of thinking about people who live in cities and their opinions of how cities should develop, and particularly affordable housing. And in Vancouver, this is going to be central as we begin developing a new city plan, which is going to be taking place over 4 years. So plan for that. Again, our presenters, we have some copies of a lovely book of poems, The Revolving City, 51 poems and stories behind them by Wade Compton, Renee Sakalar. Thank you so much. And thank you for your questions, your observations, your opinions, and please join us again. Really good.